One single phone call stopped the entire Allied war machine cold. Not enemy firepower, not logistical collapse, but political ego. And that decision, it gave Hitler's crumbling army the lifeline they desperately craved. August 25, 1944. General George S. Patton's Third Army had blazed through 400 miles in just 3 weeks. His armored columns were thundering south of Paris, severing German withdrawal paths. The German military throughout Western Europe was practically annihilated. Standing between Patton's spearhead and Germany's homeland, absolutely nothing. German battalions were ditching their gear and scrambling eastward toward the Rhine River. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge informed Hitler that the Wehrmacht throughout France was utterly finished. Then a telephone conversation from Paris froze everything. Not enemy counterattacks, not logistical shortages, a political ultimatum from a French commander who directed 0 American soldiers and possessed 0 American gasoline. Charles de Gaulle was about to hand Germany the breathing space it desperately required. 6 weeks before, American soldiers had been trapped in the Normandy hedgerows. Each pasture was a bunker. Each hedge formed a protective barrier. The push toward Paris had ground down in savage hand-to-hand fighting. On July 25th, Operation Cobra smashed German positions at St. Lo. General Omar Bradley's First Army punched through. Patton's Third Army went active on August 1st and instantly capitalized on the breakthrough. Patton's armored units were racing so quickly that frontline air coordinators couldn't maintain situational awareness of the combat zone. Tank leaders were navigating beyond the charts provided to them. Formations were covering 30 miles daily through openings the Germans couldn't seal. By mid-August, German leadership acknowledged they possessed no method to halt the American push. The uncertainty wasn't whether the Allies would arrive at Germany. The uncertainty was the timing. Patton's surge was generating a supply catastrophe. Third Army was burning through 400,000 gallons of gasoline daily. Supply chains extended back 400 miles to Normandy's shoreline. The Red Ball Express was operating convoys around the clock. Drivers battled through complete exhaustion to maintain Patton's armor rolling, but even extreme commitment couldn't equal Patton's velocity. By August 20th, Third Army was running short on gasoline. Patton commanded his officers to maintain forward momentum until vehicles literally sputtered empty. He trusted that forward momentum outweighed prudence. His calculated risk was paying off. German troops throughout France were falling apart. Paris sat within striking distance. Beyond Paris stretched undefended terrain all the way to Germany's frontier. One armored commander in the 4th Armored Division sent letters home describing how they could practically sense the terror among retreating Germans. The soldiers were operating on pure adrenaline and coffee, convinced they'd be resting in Berlin before Christmas. They ignored their weariness. They focused on completing it. And then Charles de Gaulle stepped in. While Allied leadership debated about Paris, Field Marshal Walter Model was accomplishing something miraculous. Hitler had dispatched him westward on August 17th with instructions to salvage whatever remained of the German military. Model discovered total disorder. Formations were dispersed throughout France. Leadership hierarchy had disintegrated. The circumstances appeared impossible, but Model recognized something that offered him encouragement. The American surge was decelerating. Not because German opposition was strengthening, because the Americans were pausing independently. Model's senior staff member reported that American columns approaching Paris had frozen their advance. They weren't assaulting, they were anticipating something. Model commanded instant response. Withdraw every surviving formation back toward Germany. Create protective positions along the Moselle River. Staff the Siegfried Line fortifications that had been emptied of heavy weapons and maintained with minimal personnel. Exploit every single day the Americans provided them. German leadership couldn't comprehend their fortune. 7 days prior, they'd been retreating in absolute terror. Currently, they possessed time to restructure, time to create fresh protective barriers, time to prepare for the engagements that would sacrifice tens of thousands of American soldiers. Model's head supply administrator later confirmed that the week spanning August 20th through August 27th rescued German troops from total annihilation. Charles de Gaulle had been anticipating 4 years for this occasion. Paris represented the essence of France. Its freedom would determine who shaped France's destiny, and de Gaulle was absolutely determined that French soldiers would march into Paris initially. On August 21st, de Gaulle convened with Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower. His communication was straightforward. French soldiers must free Paris, not Americans, not British, French. Eisenhower outlined the battlefield circumstances. Patton was positioned to block German withdrawal paths. American columns could capture Paris within days. There existed zero battlefield justification to postpone. De Gaulle dismissed battlefield justifications. He prioritized political circumstances. France had been conquered for 4 years. The French population required witnessing French troops freeing their capital. The Paris underground had already staged an uprising on August 19th. They were sacrificing themselves in the avenues. Then de Gaulle issued his ultimatum. If Eisenhower refused to permit French soldiers to free Paris, de Gaulle would command the French 2nd Armored Division to storm the city regardless. He would shatter the Allied command hierarchy. Regardless, the advance toward Germany would freeze. Eisenhower had faced this dilemma previously. Battlefield strategy versus political requirements. Combat effectiveness versus alliance cohesion. He understood what Washington demanded. Preserve the coalition together. Keep de Gaulle satisfied. Eisenhower contacted Bradley and outlined the circumstances. De Gaulle was insisting that French soldiers enter Paris initially. This signified halting the American surge and redirecting assets to assist the French 2nd Armored Division. There was another element inside Paris. German commander Dietrich von Choltitz possessed Hitler's commands to demolish the city. Bridges were loaded with explosives, landmarks prepared for destruction. If the rebellion persisted without Allied assistance, Hitler demanded Paris obliterated to ruins. Bradley objected. His armies were positioned to penetrate into Germany. Every day of postponement permitted the Germans to regroup. Paris could be freed after victory was achieved. Eisenhower recognized Bradley was correct from a battlefield perspective, but he also understood President Roosevelt's concerns. The French partnership mattered. De Gaulle's collaboration would prove essential for administering liberated France. Antagonizing him currently would generate political complications for months. Eisenhower reached his conclusion. The French 2nd Armored Division under General Philippe Leclerc would free Paris. American columns would assist the mission but stay outside the metropolis. The advance toward Germany would freeze for at minimum 7 days. Bradley transmitted the directive to Patton. Third Army would freeze its advance. Gasoline and resources would be redirected to assist the Paris mission. The sprint to Germany was terminated. Patton was absolutely livid. He possessed momentum. He possessed an unobstructed path. And currently he was being halted so French soldiers could stage a procession in Paris. On August 25th, French soldiers entered Paris. Leclerc's division paraded down the Champs-Élysées. Masses flooded the avenues. Cathedral bells echoed throughout the metropolis. Charles stood in Notre Dame Cathedral and proclaimed France liberated. The footage was transmitted globally. The political triumph was absolute. What the images didn't reveal was the expense. While champagne bottles opened in Paris, Patton's armor sat motionless on roadside positions east of the metropolis. Gasoline that could have transported Third Army to Germany's boundary was being consumed in Paris. The Red Ball Express redirected thousands of tons of resources to assist the Paris mission. French soldiers required ammunition, rations, and gasoline. Paris itself demanded 4,000 tons of resources daily just to maintain the civilians alive. Food, heating fuel, medication. Every convoy transporting resources to Paris was a convoy not transporting munitions to the battlefront. Eyewitnesses described GIs at the front lines, observing American convoys driving away from them, returning toward Paris, filled with jerry cans of gasoline for the celebration. Soldiers who had battled throughout France were abandoned sitting on their helmets in the filth. maintaining their weapons, while the gasoline they required to conclude the conflict was consumed in victory circles 100 miles behind them. Patton's supply administrators calculated the expense. Assisting the Paris liberation burned enough gasoline to transport Third Army 100 miles nearer to Germany. That would have positioned American columns across the Moselle River before German protections hardened. But battlefield effectiveness wasn't the concern. Political theater was, and the Germans were observing carefully. When Patton's armor finally rolled forward on August 28th, the transformation was instantaneous. The pursuit was terminated. Instead of escaping formations, American spearheads collided into barriers of anti-armor gunfire. The Moselle River, which could have been forded in inflatable boats 7 days earlier, was bristling with cannons. Third Army's intelligence administrators reported that formations that had been escaping in disarray 7 days earlier were currently battling from fortified positions along the Siegfried Line. The week of postponement had permitted the Germans to convert disorder into structured protection. By early September, Third Army confronted a gasoline emergency. The Red Ball Express couldn't satisfy requirements after the Paris diversion. Patton's armor was running empty just as they neared Germany's frontier. In the opening days of September, Patton obtained commands to freeze Third Army's advance permanently. Gasoline priority was being allocated to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's campaigns in Belgium. The sprint to Germany was terminated. Patton's columns sat 100 miles from the Rhine River with drained gasoline containers. German troops utilized September to staff the Siegfried Line, with reinforced divisions transported from Germany. The chance to conclude the conflict in 1944 vanished. Third Army wouldn't restart major attacking campaigns until November. By then, German protections were completely prepared. The effortless advance throughout France transformed into a devastating engagement through fortified positions. In September, the American advance slammed into the concrete barriers of the Siegfried Line. Soldiers discovered themselves battling for bunkers that dominated every direction of approach. The engagements transformed into a slaughterhouse. The engagements sacrificed tens of thousands of American losses. Formations that could have marched into Germany in August were currently battling for every 100 yards of territory. The conflict that could have terminated in 1944 extended into 1945. German commanders questioned after the conflict validated what Patton had recognized. The freeze at Paris provided Germany the week it required. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt declared that without that postponement, German troops couldn't have created protective positions promptly. The climate shifted. The brilliant summer days of the sprint throughout France vanished. In their position arrived the bitter rainfall and filth of autumn, and eventually the blizzards of the Ardennes. The soldiers who should have been home were currently shaking in trenches, anticipating an opponent that had been crushed 3 months prior. The postponement at Paris guaranteed the conflict would not terminate in 1944. The engagements for the Siegfried Line continued through autumn. American columns advanced forward at horrific expense. The swift triumph that appeared guaranteed in August transformed into a winter offensive. On December 16, 1944, Germany initiated the Battle of the Bulge. The assault utilized divisions that Model had restructured during the critical week in August. It purchased Hitler the winter he desperately required. American losses surpassed 80,000. Charles obtained his political triumph in Paris. The footage of French liberation defines France's post-war story. Eisenhower maintained the coalition, and thousands of Americans suffered the consequences for that political choice in the frozen wasteland of the Ardennes. The pause at Paris didn't just delay victory, it transformed a sprint into a nightmare. What could have ended in summer sunshine concluded instead in winter blood. One phone call, one political decision, 1 week of hesitation, and the cost was measured in tens of thousands of American lives.